Yes, we'll wait a minute for Mr. Meeks. All right, we'll proceed. Chairman McCall, we welcome your testimony, and we'll let Mr. Meeks join when he arrives.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member McGovern. Hamas's October 7th massacre was as cruel, barbaric, and bloody as anything I've seen. Hamas unleashed pure evil on Israel that day. The Hamas terrorists filmed themselves committing brutal atrocities because they were so proud of their barbaric acts. In just hours, they murdered 1,200 innocent people, took over 250 hostages, including Americans. And I say this to remind my colleagues of the moral clarity that we as a body felt at that time in October and November. It was obvious to us that Hamas was ruthless. It was obvious to us that Hamas needed to be eradicated to ensure Israel's security. And it was obvious to us that Hamas would fight dirty and use innocent civilians as human shields. It was obvious to us that Israel had no choice but to win this war and end the perpetual terrorist threat. We all, Republicans and Democrats, spent those weeks talking about our steadfast support for Israel and our ironclad commitment. Therefore, I'm deeply disappointed that for some in this country and for the administration that moral clarity has faded. Their ironclad commitment apparently is not, in fact, ironclad. Last week, we learned from the media, not from the administration, that the Biden administration is blocking crucial arms shipments to try to pressure Israel not to conduct the final major battle in this Gaza war. Israel is in a fight for its very existence against a terrorist organization. Rafah is the final key military objective to complete the mission against Hamas. There are 4 battalions of Hamas fighters in Rafah. President Biden's decision to withhold weapons that have been approved by myself and the ranking member and appropriated by this Congress is tantamount to an arms embargo. This damages our alliance with Israel and only emboldens Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas. It also empowers Iran, the head of the snake behind terror in the region. In my judgment, this is a dangerous mistake that telegraphs weakness and makes Israel and our allies vulnerable. What does this say about the United States as a partner? What message are we sending to our allies, our adversaries, when just months after a devastating attack, we are turning our backs? Here's what the world should know: that the United States Congress and the American people stand with Israel, that we will never turn our backs on our friends. We are true to our word. When we say a commitment is ironclad and unshakable, that we mean it. That's what today we are considering, and that's why today we're considering this urgent bill to prohibit the executive branch from using any funding to withhold or stop the delivery of defense articles to Israel, and to require the administration to deliver the defense articles they are currently holding. War is hell. It is horrific. But Israel did not start this war. Hamas did. Sadly, civilian casualties are part of urban warfare. Israel has limited this number greatly and is opening all routes for humanitarian assistance. Hamas are the ones who use human shields, hide behind hospitals, schools, and put civilians in harm's way. Hamas also uses tunnels, hundreds of miles of tunnels that make the use of bigger bombs necessary. But these bigger bombs have JDAM kits, which make them precision-guided bombs, which actually protect innocent civilians because they are just that, they are precise. And by withholding weapons to Israel, this administration is continuing to bash our ally publicly. This could have been done privately, but this is publicly for domestic political gain instead of standing shoulder to shoulder with one of our closest partners against Iran and its terror proxies. Cost of this decision is dangerous. It's a resurgence of Hamas and an emboldened Ayatollah without a shot fired. And Putin, Chairman Xi, and Kim Jong-un are all watching and taking notes. We need to project strength on the world stage. The Reagan doctrine of peace through strength is the only answer to terrorists and tyrants. In November, I organized a screening for my colleagues of the gruesome footage of the Hamas war crimes at the behest of Prime Minister Netanyahu. I made sure that we all bore witness to their massacre, and in the words of the Prime Minister, show it to them so they will know what happened to my people and they will never forget. Every member in this room knows exactly why Hamas needs to be defeated. This is the last stage of the military operation for the president to say he will withhold weapons if the invasion takes place. Is tantamount to us saying in World War II, my father's war, you cannot finish the job and go into Berlin. So I call on all of you to support me in this legislation to make sure that we stand with our traditional ally and that once this is completed, and only then can we move to the second phase, which would be a peaceful resolution in the Middle East, a security agreement between the Saudis, Israel, and Arab nations that could perhaps one day bring ultimate peace to the region and to resolve the Palestinian question. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman McCall. Thank you for that powerful statement. Mr. Meeks, if you're ready, we're prepared to receive your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me again before the Rules Committee tonight to discuss this cynical political exercise that, again, my GOP colleagues, in their attempt to use the United States-Israel relationship and American security assistance to advance basically a political agenda. Let's understand the context we find ourselves in today. More than 1 million Palestinians are sheltering in Rafah, forced there by Israeli operations in Gaza during the past 7 months. With the Egyptian and Israeli borders closed to them, they have nowhere to go. For months, the Biden administration has publicly and privately urged Israel not to launch a major offensive in Rafah without credible plans to avoid mass casualties and substantial efforts to evacuate civilians. The United States has also repeatedly pressed Israel to cease using large warhead ordinances that result in excessive civilian casualties in densely populated civilian areas. To date, Israel has presented no plan to mitigate civilian harm or commit to not using 2,000-pound bombs in Rafah. And that's why last week, following Prime Minister Netanyahu's repeatedly affirming Israel's plans for an all-out assault in Rafah, the Biden administration confirmed it would restrict a small number of large warhead air-to-ground munitions to Israel if it moved forward with a large-scale military operation in Rafah. These 2,000-pound bombs in question can create a crater 50 feet wide and 36 feet deep when dropped. They have the lethal fragmentation to a radius the size of 4 football fields. Such bombs have no place in urban combat, not in Gaza, not in Rafah, one of the most densely populated areas on the planet. The United States, too, has a duty to make sure our weapons are not disproportionately killing civilians. Let's also be clear on what is and is not happening. The administration supports Israel's goal of defeating Hamas and its terrorist infrastructure, but nothing in this one shipment is a defensive weapon or an urban combat weapon. This decision has no impact on Iron Dome interceptors or on missile defense systems. Our commitment to Israel's defense is and remains and has been ironclad. As far as the bill at hand today, it prohibits the Biden administration from exercising executive branch prerogative and holding or suspending U.S. arms transfers to Israel, including these large warhead munitions, and any other defense article. It also forces the administration to deliver any such item to Israel within 15 days of enactment, and if the administration is unable to comply, the GOP legislation immediately freezes significant parts of the Defense Department, the State Department, and the national security budgets. And according to the Defense Department itself, withholding defense-wide DoD operations and maintenance funds jeopardizes DoD's ability to fulfill its constitutional obligation to the defense of the United States, which could cause significant harm to the United States' national security. Further, these budgetary freezes would undermine U.S. defense leadership when we are simultaneously competing in the Indo-Pacific, supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russia's war of aggression, and working with our partners in sub-Saharan Africa on security challenges. Again, this is all tremendously dangerous for our own national security. And again, what my Republican colleagues have done here is rushed without going through regular order, or any kind of order for that matter. Had it been marked up in the Foreign Affairs Committee, we would have been able to highlight that this legislation undercuts a number of crucial existing U.S. laws that are in the Foreign Affairs Committee's jurisdiction, including the Arms Export Control Act, the Leahy Law, and executive policies, including the Conventional Arms Transfer Policy and the National Security Memorandum number 20. It also places our national security at risk by withholding Defense and State Department budgets and a politicized attack on the Biden administration, and that's merely what this is, a politicized attack on the Biden administration. Furthermore, the bill includes a blatantly political attack on military officers and hardworking civil servants and U.S. government employees by mandating Inspector General investigations into individuals, not agencies or departments, and orders the withholding of their salaries in a brazen and politicized witch hunt, which keeps going on and on and on again. My Republican friends seem to think that President Biden's actions are unprecedented. But there's a history of the United States withholding security assistance to Israel at times. And I recall that president being a Republican by the name of Ronald Reagan. And I know many in here call themselves Reagan Republicans. But Reagan did the exact same thing based on concerns with Israel's military actions on not one, but two occasions, in 1981 and in 1982. And let me also remind my colleagues that President Biden became the first United States president to directly defend Israel from attack, using U.S. troops and military assets to defend Israel against the Iranian missiles and drone attack that could have resulted in deaths many multiples of times on October the 7th. Suggesting that the only president to repeatedly call himself a Zionist, that's Joe Biden, that the first president to visit Israel during wartime, that's Joe Biden, and then requested unprecedented aid to Israel, would abandon or betray Israel is simply absurd. And let's be clear, President Biden paused one arms shipment and said he would withhold further specific offensive weapons if Israel launched a full-scale operation into Rafah. The president continues to be focused on the hostages and their release, and puts the onus on Hamas to reach a deal, and supports Israel's right to eradicate Hamas. But we've got to ask, the types of bombs, the single 5,000-pound bombs and 500-pound bombs in an area like Rafah, where you may get 100 individuals from Hamas, but possibly kill 1,000 innocent victims. What we have with Israel and what we need to make sure is what our values are. And everybody's life, all life is important. And all Palestinians are not Hamas. No one supports Hamas and the vicious acts that it took upon innocent Israeli citizens. This is a fight against Hamas, but nor should we lose the lives of innocent Palestinians who were there in millions because they had no place else to go, and now being moved to a camp where there's no water, where there's no sanitary conditions, where we already, from the words of Sidney McCain and others, are looking at famine taking place. We just have to have some values, work together, and no one, the President of the United States, is not stopping on-ground attacks against Hamas that's focused. This is about 2,000-pound bombs being dropped in densely populated areas where the loss of life is in the thousands. That's not who we are. That's not who we should be. There's appropriate types of weapons to be utilized on the ground to go after Hamas, not something that's going to kill innocent people. And that's all the President of the United States said. Not turning your back on people who are innocent. People who, before October the 6th, were firmly against Hamas. We've got to think about, and this is the concern the president has, and this is what no one else is talking about, how does this end game occur? What happens in the end so that Israel can be in an environment and in an area that it does not have to worry about being attacked by Hamas or anyone else. And the Palestinians have a place, a state of their own. So a two-state solution is what is looked at in the region. And what is very important and what this administration is focused on to make sure that after this war is over, we have a better Middle East where there can be peace between two people, two countries, two-state solution, a Jewish state of Israel and a Palestinian state. That's how we resolve the Middle East, and we don't get back to a repetitiveness of war after war and innocent people dying. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I want to thank both of our witnesses.
And I oppose this, moving this bill forward.
And I know you do have a history of working very well together, Mr. Chairman McCall. I just wondered if you had any observations after hearing what Ranking Member Meeks has just told us.
I mean, there are several, and we do work well together. We both support, in fact, we were scheduled to have a trip to Saudi and Israel to talk about this peace plan. But I can tell you in my discussions with the Israelis that you cannot get to that point until the Hamas situation is taken care of. And that cannot be done without Rafah being dealt with. There are 4 battalions of Hamas soldiers in Rafah under Sinwar's orders and direction, who is hiding in the tunnels. These bombs that he is talking about, and I understand what he's saying, but with every one of these, we deliver what's called a JDAM kit, which then turns them into precision-guided bombs. That means precise. That means it protects innocent civilians. Because of the tunnel situation in Rafah, surrounded by 300 miles of tunnels, it's necessary to take out the tunnel operation. If you look at the Shiva hospital, it is surrounded by almost like a crater. They didn't hit the hospital, where Hamas operates out of, by the way, with human shields, but rather they hit the tunnel operation, which is the gateway, the terror gateway into Gaza. The biggest tunnel operation is in Rafah. It is a crown jewel, if you will, and from those tunnels comes all the weapons and all the drugs that Hamas uses. It's inconceivable to think, and Israel, I've talked to them quite a bit, inconceivable we can move to plan 2, phase 2, which is the peace resolution, until the Hamas question is finished. And it cannot be dealt with until Rafah is dealt with. The president's comments are very clear. I'm sympathetic to the humanitarian cause, and I've talked to the Israelis about this. But the fact is, the president himself said they're basically that if they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that they have used historically to deal with the cities. So and this is public. My point is, you can do this with private diplomacy. You don't have to do this to our greatest ally in the Middle East publicly. He says, I have to take the president at his own word. We're getting zero information from this administration. They have not been transparent. We have to listen to him on CNN when he says, if they go into Rafah, we're going to cut off the weapons. We're going to have an embargo. It's a shot across the bow, and I think it impacts our adversaries as well as our allies who may not trust us, moving forward in the future. But, Mr. Chairman, this is a really key point here. These weapons were signed off on many years ago by Mr. Meeks and myself. The Four Corners, being chairman, ranking member in House and Senate, we sign off on all foreign military sales. We had Congress appropriate funds for the specific intent to deliver these defense articles to Israel. What the president has done is defied the intent of Congress under our Article 1 authorities, using his Article 2 to circumvent what Congress has done when we passed. Most of this happened before this supplemental, but Mr. Chairman, as we look at this bill, it talks about FY24 and FY25. What if he starts reversing course on the supplemental bill that we just passed? The clear intent of Congress and the Four Corners approving was so these defense articles would be provided to Israel. Now, whether they use them and how they use them, I think that can be negotiated with the administration. But to have an outright embargo sends a really bad message to Israel, but beyond that, creates a dangerous situation where our allies may not trust us. As Saudis looking at buying weapons from us for a security agreement, what are they supposed to think? Can they trust us? And what are our adversaries, more importantly, going to think? What if Iran cut off its weapons shipments to Hezbollah or to the Houthi rebels? What kind of message would that send to us? Weakness. Yet, I would say Yahya Sinwar had a victory without a shot fired.
And truly disturbing. You're right about the administration not being transparent. You wouldn't have known about it except for a news story, and then Secretary Austin was confronted in a Senate hearing and had to admit that this was in fact what was going on. And one of the things that bothers me over and over again about this administration is they always signal what they're not going to do. I mean, you want your enemy to be guessing about your power and what your capabilities are. You don't want to open negotiations by saying, oh, well, we'll never do this. Fortunately, if you do that, you're never getting the hostages back, and that ultimately should be our goal.
And it takes their deterrence away as well. It makes them look weak with Hamas. It makes them look weak to the surrounding region, if you will, in the Middle East, which is a very dangerous neighborhood.
Well, I know we have a vote on. I'll yield to the gentlelady. Well,
We need to recess
the vote's almost done, so the committee will stand in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
back at the start of the second vote.
The committee will reconvene at the start of the second vote. Committee stands in recess.
At the start of the second vote or at the end of the second vote?
Go vote. Yep, because it's only 2 votes in the series, so
So
Committee will come to order. We'll resume questioning of our witnesses by recognizing our ranking member, Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee for being here. And I've worked with both of them on a lot of human rights issues over the years, and I appreciate their leadership. And I guess and let me just also preface my questions by saying I think there is no equivocation on our side in terms of condemning Hamas for what happened on October 7th. There aren't adjectives enough to describe how horrific those attacks were, and that they're also, a gross violation of international human rights law. There's no question about that. But we also have, but everybody has to be held up to international law as well as U.S. law. And, and what the president has done is basically said he wanted to withhold some weapons, mainly the 2-ton bombs, from being used in Rafah. And there's 1.3 million people who are right now in Rafah. Do anyone know what the blast radius of one of those 2-ton bombs is?
About 4 foot long.
Yeah, so that's about a quarter of a mile. Quarter of a mile. It is hard to protect civilians when you're dropping a bomb that has a blast radius of a quarter of a mile. Would you both agree on that?
My understanding is it's about 115 feet is the blast radius. If it has a JDAM kit on it, which makes it precise.
Well, we're hearing different, Mr. Yeah.
And there's been some previous film where the bomb, 2,000-pound bomb, stopped, and buildings
Right, collapsed. Right.
It was precise, the bomb was precise, it hit where it was supposed to hit, but as a result, because of the radius, 3 or 4 residential buildings collapsed, killing thousands of people. Precise bomb.
Well, and let me ask Chairman McCall, do you believe that somebody can be a friend of Israel but also be a critic of the Netanyahu government?
I mean, of course, any democracy has that right.
Right.
If I could mention the 2,000-pound bombs, they, first, I think evacuating the city is key.
Right.
And as, Ron Dermer's told me, they're not going to start evacuating until they see an imminent threat of an invasion. Now, you're seeing 500,000 now have left Rafah. That means there are about 1 million left.
So, right, but we're being told, so there's a bunch of issues here, right?
Yeah.
One is getting people out of Rafah, but where do they go? And we're being told by humanitarian organizations there isn't the infrastructure to be able to accommodate those that are leaving in such huge numbers. We also know from virtually every humanitarian organization and the United Nations and whatever other group, that there is a famine happening in Gaza as we speak. People are without food and medical supplies, and so this is this is not merely okay. Today we're going to bomb, so tomorrow we're going to bomb. So today move, and there's a place for people to go. I guess let me ask you a question. You both know what the Leahy law is, right?
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong. The Leahy law would prohibit U.S. assistance to a foreign security force when there is credible information that the unit has committed a gross violation of human rights. Is that about right?
Yep.
Without saying whether or not there are any units in the Israeli military that qualify for this, if they did, would you favor the withholding of aid to those units? Would you think Israel should be exempt from the Leahy laws?
If we go back to Reagan, I know he cited quite a bit. In that case, there was a violation of the international humanitarian laws. in U.S. laws, and to the extent they were using cluster
Munitions, right,
munitions. In this case, we have a national security memo.
What?
In this case, we have a national security memo signed by the Secretary of State expressly stating that Israel is not in violation of international
Well, I'm just
humanitarian laws. And in fact, they say they're consistent with the Foreign Assistance Act.
Well,
That's
yeah,
this
but I
administration.
guess I'm actually asking a hypothetical. If in fact they were deemed to be in violation of the Leahy law.
I think
would
what
you-
what
would
Reagan
you-
did is a good example.
Yeah, I'm looking at from the tweet, entry from Reagan's diary in 1982, when he blocked some weapons to Israel because of the Israeli military attacks on Lebanon that Reagan thought went too far. And this is what he said. He said, "I was angry. I told Begin that it had to stop or our entire future relationship was endangered. I used the word Holocaust deliberately and said the symbol of his war was becoming a picture of a 7-month-old baby with his arms blown off. He told me he had ordered the bombing stopped. I asked him about artillery fire. He claimed the PLO had started that and Israeli forces had taken casualties. End of call. 20 minutes later, he called to tell me that he'd order an end to the barrage and plead for our continued friendship." I mean, that's Reagan's words directly. You're also aware what Section 620I of the U.S. Foreign Assistance Act is, right? I mean, that basically it says that a transfer of arms to a country, that we would stop a transfer of arms to a country that frustrates humanitarian aid from being delivered to people at risk, right? Again, without saying that Israel has violated this or not, if it was deemed that Israel was in violation of that, would you favor that we actually enforce the U.S. law, or do you think Israel should be exempt from that?
No, I think as Reagan, he applied international law because of the cluster munitions found they were in violation.
Right, but he got
And
Begin, he got
therefore-
Begin to stop, he got Begin to act. I mean, Netanyahu says he's going full steam ahead into Rafah. So, I mean, I think the deal is that Reagan got his desired result with the threat of withholding weapons.
And I know you're speaking in hypotheticals.
Yeah, I
I'd
am.
like to cite to you what this administration said on that very point.
Right.
The Secretary of State signed a national security memo that said, quote, "We do not currently assess that the Israeli government is prohibiting or otherwise restricting the transport or delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance within the meaning of Section 6201 of the Foreign Assistance Act." So that is the Biden administration's words, not mine. And I know you're talking about hypotheticals.
Yeah,
I would agree with you.
No, I'm-
If there's a violation of international law, then I would do what Reagan did.
Right, and because, but as I read your bill, if your bill had been law when Reagan was president, he would not have been able to do what he did. Am I missing something here?
Not if it's in violation of international
Well, I mean,
law,
I mean,
the Foreign Assistance Act.
well, I mean, so basically you're saying that if it is determined that Israel is in violation of the Leahy law or is in violation of Section 620I of the U.S. Foreign Assistance Act, if it is determined that they are, then the United States should withhold aid to Israel.
I think in that case, I would do what President Reagan did. This bill would not prohibit if they are in violation of international law, but the fact is this administration held that they were not in violation of international law.
But if the administration were to determine that, you would be fine with them withholding aid to Israel?
If there is a determination in violation of international law,
Or
in
US
violation
law,
of the
or US
in
law.
violation of the Leahy
Yeah, right.
amendments,
Right.
that would draw concerns, but that is not the case here. In fact, if you look at the ratios, I mean, if you look at the ratios of Mosul, which is the closest comparison we have of urban warfare, it was 5 to 2. That means for every 2 ISIS-K killed, 5 innocent civilians were killed. If you look at what's happening in Gaza, the ratio is 2 to 1, which means for every Hamas killed 2 civilians. So that actually
yeah.
Israel's doing a better job than the Americans did in Mosul and Iraq.
Well, and again, I have been a critic of the U.S. when we have, in my opinion, violated international humanitarian law as well. I mean, we are not perfect, and nobody is saying we are. Yet there are these, there are standards, and the president is using executive authority, which he has the right to do so, to try to prevent, basically kind of what Reagan was trying to do as well, trying to prevent a further humanitarian crisis in Rafah. I mean,
But if I could just comment, in Reagan's time, what did Reagan do? He consulted with Congress, because we have the Article I authorities to approve these weapon sales, which Mr. Meeks and I did, and we appropriate the monies for a specific intent. There was no, in this case, there's been no discussion with Congress. They have run around and done all this without giving any information to the United States Congress.
And hopefully you're getting a briefing from the administration, but they're not stopping aid. I mean, I just got a headline from the Wall Street Journal that, a huge amount of weaponry is being sent over to Israel as we speak. What he is doing is he's temporarily withholding this, trying to get a result that he wants, and that is no more civilian casualties. I mean, I think his view is that the more civilians that are killed in Gaza, the more radicalized the population is going to be. That doesn't undercut Hamas. It does the opposite. And I think that none of us would be human if we did not, see the pictures and hear the firsthand accounts of what is happening in Gaza. If our hearts didn't break, just as our hearts broke when we saw what happened on October 7th. And so I'm just, and again, I mean, I want to ask you as consent to insert in the record a statement from the Human Rights Watch that came out today, basically saying Israelis attacking known aid worker locations. Whether that.
For the unanimous consent request without objection. So
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the Foreign Affairs Committee needs to do its due diligence, but, I mean, there is a concern that humanitarian aid is not getting to people who need it, and that, again, the use of these 2-ton bombs, I mean, 2 tons, in and of itself, I mean, the idea that it's a little footprint, I don't believe, I mean, that's just not the case. Dropped in an area where there is 1.3 million people,
I don't think that's that's Israel's intent here. I would argue that we dropped these bombs in Iraq. The goal is to have evacuations to a humanitarian zone. The value of these bombs is to,
and is there a humanitarian
is to
zone for people
destroy
to go
the
to?
tunnel network that provides the weapons and safe haven for Hamas, and to hit large structures that don't involve civilians.
Well,
And
let me
so-
ask you both. Are any of you concerned about the way Netanyahu's government has prosecuted this war in terms of civilian casualties in Gaza? I mean,
Well, let me just say, Hamas has blocked most of these checkpoints. They
but we're not
destroyed
arming,
areas.
We're not arming
Hamas they killed Israeli soldiers trying to move weapons.
And we're not debating.
I'm sorry, humanitarian
And
systems in Gaza.
nobody here is debating.
And Egypt
No one here is defending
stopping
Hamas.
the Rafah crossing
Yeah,
right now.
nobody here is. Nobody here is defending Hamas. We all condemn what Hamas did. They are horrific, awful. And no adjectives can describe them. I get that. But the people that are caught in between Hamas and Mr. Netanyahu are, those are the civilians, the women and the children, the elderly people. There are people who are not militants here. I mean, I guess maybe some people believe everybody is, but the reality is we know that there are civilians that are being targeted, and I think that's where that's what the president is trying to avoid.
Well,
because he thinks it will be counterproductive.
Yeah.
And I agree with him.
Well, let me just say, I agree with you to the extent the evacuation will take 4 weeks before any military operation begins. I agree with you. The humanitarian zone has to be established with a structure, intent, and humanitarian aid and assistance to take care of these people. And I know that is Israel's intent. They need the evacuation to happen. They need 4 weeks, but they do need a safe humanitarian zone to go to. I completely agree with that.
And Mr. Meeks.
And the president has asked for that. That's what the president has continually said. Show me the plan.
Right. And where is it?
What
Have
we're
you
gonna
seen the
do.
plan?
No, not seen the plan.
It has been submitted
And
to the
The
administration.
administration says they have not seen, Jake Sullivan said today They have not seen a plan.
The ambassador Herzog told me they had, so I don't know who's
But
telling.
he said they have not seen a plan.
Well, maybe you could hook up a conference call with them to make sure that everybody
So we
sees
have
what
not
everybody
seen a
says they've been
plan.
passing.
And, you know, when we talk about, you know, and Mr. McCall is correct, when we said we were going to go to the region to talk to Saudi Arabia and talk to a number of other countries and to Israel, like we have. Because what I am concerned about, by completely disregarding that and by some of Mr. Netanyahu's comments, no matter what the president says, and the president's been trying to talk to him for a long time behind the scenes in a diplomatic way. The one that has made the public statements, of course, has been the prime minister. But I'm also concerned about how do we get so that the people of Israel can live in peace. Talking about the end result. And we talked about allies. I mean, when I saw for the first time when Iran attacked Israel, Israel didn't have to stand by itself.
Right.
Israel had the United States, it had Jordan, it had Saudi Arabia, all working collectively to protect Israel, which gives me what I think is important for the end result. And when I talk to the Saudi Arabians now, they say if Israel continues to go into Rafah and thousands of innocent people continue to die, then they can no longer talk about normalization with Israel. And as I talk to ambassadors and to some of the foreign leaders, that's their concern also. What happens in the end result? And they are all saying that what the president is doing, our allies and our friends, is exactly the right thing, that we can finally have peace in the Middle East where the Israelis can live without having fear of being attacked, and the Palestinians have a place that they can call their own. That should be all of our goals.
Well, let me, I don't want to belabor this point, but you know, one of my concerns is that it appears to me that the lives of Palestinian civilians in Gaza is becoming an afterthought. And you know, I was watching some of the news programs over the weekend. I'm sure you were as well. I heard Senator Graham say, you know, we should do it. They should do whatever they need to do. You know, we dropped a bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They got to do whatever they got to do. That doesn't indicate to me that he cares very much about what happens to innocent civilians in Gaza. I am deeply, deeply worried. But this is a terrible humanitarian catastrophe. And I think what the president is trying to do is to see whether he can lessen that. At the same time, you know, ensuring Israel's security and helping Israel move to, as Mr. Meek said, a different day. There seems to be, you know, some desire by a lot of Arab nations who have never been particularly helpful in the past to want to be part of helping Israel move forward to a better day. I worry that, you know, a massive civilian casualties in Gaza are going to make that impossible. I also worry, as the president does, that massive civilian casualties in the long run benefits Gaza. Benefits Hamas and not Israel. This is a terrible, terrible tragedy. And again, you know, this is not in any way to excuse what Hamas did. It is awful. It is evil what they did. It is to simply say that as a friend of Israel, I think what the president is trying to do is to guide this government to making better choices so that, you know, more and more innocent people don't die. Again, this is not about going after Hamas. It is about protecting civilians. And in any event, I appreciate both of you, but I think what we're trying to do here, again, just one thought, why didn't we do a hearing or a markup on this?
I think because of the urgency of the issue.
Right, but you could have done a
And I
hearing
find
today.
it coincidental that all of a sudden the administration is giving us notification of $1 billion of weapons now to
Right, no, I bet
go
that's.
to Israel.
yeah.
But having said,
Also, that
can I just say I agree?
on this bill.
Yeah.
The administration has told you what they feel
Right.
about this bill.
So
specifically.
let me just say that I've met with Cindy McCain. I've talked to the Israelis. It's in your best interest to open up all routes. Hamas is getting in the way. So
But they
these are-
haven't.
But it's in their best interest to provide that humanitarian zone that they can go to before an invasion occurs.
But they haven't, and you
they
know,
need to.
for all, yeah, well, but I mean, it's easy for us to say that they
Well,
should.
they've begun the
No, it's
preparation.
easy to say they should when there are people that are starving, and there are people without medical aid. And so but I wish you guys would have done a hearing on this.
I agree.
Because I think, the Foreign Affairs Committee is a better place to have this discussion than the Rules Committee. But I think this is the wrong way to proceed.
Well, I agree with David Cameron, UK Foreign Secretary. He said blocking these weapons is not a wise path. Now, what he's saying, I think all this, without defying congressional intent, could have been done in a private diplomatic channel.
It has been
And that's
attempted to.
unfortunate.
It has been attempted to do in a private
Right, and
diplomatic
I don't know what private
And-
conversations went
and
on
I-
before this.
And I keep hearing all these weapons. It's not all these weapons. The only weapon that the president said that he would not send is the 2,000-pound bombs, a single order. It's not all these weapons. It's one delivery of 2,000-pound bombs. That's it.
Right.
So
Well, I
it's
haven't
no
been
more
briefed
than
by
that.
the administration. I don't know what's true
Well-
or not. We don't know what's being withheld.
Well,
This
I-
has not
I-
been a
I-
very
I-
transparent
I think
administration.
this is
a political win
a bad move. With that, I yield back.
Chair, thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McCall, Chairman McCall, do we know how many more enemy combatants, like members of Hamas, remain in Gaza? Or is there an estimate?
Yeah, so the estimates we have are 4 battalions, which would be about 4,000. And these are unlike, say like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, these are really military brigades or battalions, which would be 4,000 hardened Hamas soldiers.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around how many civilian casualties we expect if these bombs are delivered and then the attack on Rafah happens. Netanyahu said in a podcast that it's been reported that he said in a podcast there have been about 16,000 civilian casualties and 16,000 civilian deaths and 14,000 deaths of enemy combatants, which is about a 1-for-1. And so, I mean, would we expect if there are 4,000 more enemy combatants that are going to be 4,000 more civilian casualties, civilian deaths?
If you go with the current ratio that has been reported, and that's essentially 2 to 1, 2 innocent civilians per 1 Hamas, then you would double the 4,000 number. That would be 8,000. Yeah.
Mr. Meeks, how many people are in Rafah right now, estimated population?
1.3 million
And then for all of Gaza, isn't it about 2.3 million?
for all of Gaza, yes.
So over half the population of Gaza is now in Rafah.
That's correct.
And that's the target of the next stage to use these bombs on.
That is correct. And it's all densely populated. These folks came from other places in Gaza. And if you drop a 2,000-pound bomb there, thousands of innocent individuals will die.
So that's what I looked up. There was some discussion earlier about what the lethal radius of one of these 2,000-pound bombs is. And what I read was 600 feet. So I've heard everything from 100 feet to 1,200 feet. And it's probably whatever term of art you use, kill radius, lethal radius, blast radius, but you can kill people within 600 feet of these bombs, I think it's generally acknowledged. That's the radius, not the diameter. The diameter would be 1,200 feet. So even if you could drop these within 30 feet using GPS or 10 feet using GPS, they're still going to indiscriminately kill people within hundreds of feet of that target, aren't they, Mr. Meeks?
Absolutely. Very similar to the cluster bombs of which Ronald Reagan was talking about, which he wanted to stop in '81 because of the collateral damage that such a bomb creates, particularly in a dense area like in Rafah and in Gaza.
And then I'm reading that he's withheld the shipment of 1,800 of these 2,000-pound bombs, and 1,700 of the 500-pound bombs. And given that radius of lethality, you could almost, depending on how you use these bombs, cover all of Rafah. If there are enough bombs in that shipment, if you overlap the lethal radius, to cover the entire city.
That is absolutely correct. And there's other munitions that could be utilized to go after Hamas other than those bombs, which will kill thousands of innocent individuals, where you could reduce ratios, et cetera. And there's been no stopping of those munitions by this administration. The only one he's talked about is the 2,000-pound bomb and the 500 that you've just articulated.
Well, let me just say, in northern Gaza,
No.
this operation was done in northern Gaza, Gaza City. They had the 2,000-pound bombs and the 500. This is according to Al Jazeera, which I don't normally quote, but a 500-pound bomb has 65 feet radius, and a 2,000-pound bomb has 115 feet. But irrespective, they had these in Gaza City, and you didn't see these catastrophic innocent civilian casualties. Again,
I did.
and it was a 2-to-1, whereas in Mosul, it was a 5-to-2 ratio, which says to me that their ratios are actually getting better, and it was better than what the United States did in Iraq. And I think if you look at Gaza City, you can see they didn't drop these 2,000-pound bombs indiscriminately. They did it primarily, like the Shiva Hospital, to bomb the tunnel network that goes around it. In this case, they want to bomb the tunnel that goes from Egypt into Rafah. I don't think they're going to be dropping these bombs. They want to evacuate all these civilians before they even begin this campaign
Those that
into Rafah.
escaped, when it was time for them to leave, that tried to go back, there was nothing there. The places, those residential homes where they lived, there was nothing there as a result where those 2,000 pounds were bombed. They had no place to go back to when they tried to go back to their places. It destroyed them.
Getting back to the scale of the civilian casualties here, I mean, the numbers are obviously in dispute. Netanyahu believes there have been 30,000 casualties, of which he characterized 16,000 as civilian. But the health officials in Gaza said there have been to 35,000 casualties. They don't separate between enemy combatants and civilians, but that there may be 10,000 people missing in the rubble. Well, let's just take a number. Let's just go with 23,000 civilian casualties. If there's 2.3 million people in Gaza, or were 2.3 million people in Gaza, that's 1%. If there have been 23,000 civilian casualties, or will be by the end of this campaign, 1% of the entire civilian population of Gaza will have been wiped out. We're not talking about people who've lost their sight or had limbs blown off or crippled in some way for life. We're just talking about the people who died. 1% of the civilian population. If that were the United States, 1% of the United States would be 3.5 million people. It'd be, just to put that into scale, the degree of devastation that this has had on the civilian population. One question that I do have, and both of you serve on the committee that would know this answer, you know, I'm a proponent of Congress exercising its power, constitutional separation of powers, and we do have the power to declare war. And sometimes I think the president oversteps his authority there. My question is, are we questioning whether the president has this authority or not? Or do we all acknowledge he's within the bounds of his executive branch power to stop this shipment, even though we have authorized it? Where are we constitutionally and legally? I mean, and take this president out of the equation. What if it were President Trump and he weren't shipping things to Ukraine that we had authorized? Does a president, not this president, but does a president have the authority to stop an arms shipment to another country if he deems that it's in the best interest of the United States? Ranking Member Meeks, what do you think?
I think that the president has that prerogative. I think that to evaluate the humanitarian use of those weapons that would lift up or continue the same values that we have in that regards. I think that a president does have that ability, that authority to look and make that determination. Absolutely. I mean, in a way that we would not want individuals to utilize weapons in a manner that violates the rules of war and causes death and destruction of innocence.
Chairman McCall, do you think the executive branch has that authority? Is he abusing authority? Not is he using good judgment. I know you don't think it's good judgment. But does the executive branch, whether it be Trump or Biden, have this kind of authority?
I think, yeah, the executive branch has broad powers under Article 2. What we're trying to address with this bill is sort of the loophole out there that, that Congress can approve and appropriate monies. As you know, we have the power of the purse. And so this is always in our committee, whether it's war powers or AUMF, which some argue is not constitutional, that it should be declaring war. He has broad powers, but our Article 1 authorities, I think, have been abused here because it was Congress's intent, and we both approved these weapons specifically to go into Israel. And this president is defying that congressional intent, and that is the intent behind this bill, is to address that gap. And if I just say, again, unlike Reagan, who worked with the Congress, we've had no notification from this administration, no communication, no transparency. If they wanted to work this out with Congress, then come talk to us.
I do find that aspect of it troubling.
It is very troubling. And maybe, just maybe, we could have worked something out, or maybe a private diplomatic channel, but to just blindside the Congress.
And maybe if
particularly after we pass a supplemental bill and then defy congressional intent, I think that is what is most irritating.
And maybe if we had done this in regular order, and maybe if we had had hearings, and maybe if we could have had this kind of conversation in a hearing in an appropriate manner, we could have gotten to a point where we could agree and talk and work together. But by bypassing the rules, bypassing them and doing it here in the Rules Committee prevented any of that from happening. So if we had gone by regular order, then there would have been an opportunity to debate and have that. And talking about this bill specifically, which is what we're here to talk about, this bill in and of itself threatens our own national security by what the language says, by cutting and or immediately freezing significant parts of the Defense Department, the State Department, and the National Security Council budgets. That puts and jeopardizes us and our national security. This bill that we're trying to get through now.
I would say it's hard to have regular order, sir, if you have an administration that wholly fails to come brief the Congress. As you know, before we mark up a bill, we have hearings. But if we have an administration that is completely hiding the 8-ball from us, not providing any information, all the information I obtained was from the news.
I have found that
The best evidence I have is President Biden on CNN, where he doesn't talk about humanitarian. He just says no weapons, period, if they invade Rafah. So,
he did not say that. Number
well,
one.
there's
He
a
said
I'll
no.
reclaim. Let me
There's a
reclaim
direct
my
quote.
time.
And
Go ahead,
and
Mr. Meeks.
There's not been a time that I know of. We've had several
Point is,
hearings in the
if you want
committee.
regular order, come brief us, right?
Several hearings, and the administration
passionate. I love
has
that.
always sent someone for us to examine. We've had the State Department, and that's who we have jurisdiction over, members of the State Department. And members of the State Department have consistently come before our committee and testified.
Not on
I
this.
have had,
Not
I've
on
had
this subject.
opportunities to go into both classified as well as hearings where the administration, at the request of the chairman and or other members, have come, whether it's, and offered to give us information in that regards. And this, what the president's statement comes after months of talking
I
diplomatically
I
to
suspect-
Mr. Netanyahu.
I suspect even if this passes the House, it may not make it through the Senate, and he'll have plenty of chance to come and brief us. And so hopefully that rings true, that the executive branch will brief us. I want to wrap up my questions.
Can I respond? Because we are going to mark up a bill that just give us notification before you make a decision like that. That'll be the first phase. And the second is we can file a joint resolution of disapproval that Congress has every right to do under the Constitution. And then that could pass the Senate. Of course, the president would veto. We'd have a chance to override. Now, I think that will be a regular order process that we'll go through.
All right, I'm going to try to wrap up my questions here. One genuine question I have, a member on our side of the aisle, Mr. Andrew Clyde from Georgia, has expressed concern that there are some small arms shipments that could be going to Israel that have been held up by this executive branch, the State Department, or somebody who's responsible for it. These would be small arms that would go to Israel, not to, I don't think to wage a war in Gaza, but for self-defense. Is that true? And does this bill cover it?
Well, on that case, I sent a letter to the administration after talking to Mr. Clyde. I was concerned that they were holding up the shipment of weapons, albeit rifles. We were provided with no notification of the sale or withholding of the sale. And again, no briefing. We've requested briefings, but we've received none. Just like in this case, talk about regular order, the reason why, it's an emergency, it's a wartime situation, it's a hot war, and the administration overrode congressional intent, and they did it with the arrogance of not briefing Congress or talking to us.
Mr. Meeks, do you know about the small arms shipment that allegedly the administration is stopping from happening to Israel?
The only thing I know in that regards, there is some small arms, and that was to deal with the West Bank, to make sure that some of the things that some of the settlers on the West Bank was utilizing some of those small arms in ways that, again, that were not in the values of which we did, utilizing them against Palestinians in that regard. And so they wanted to make sure that the utilization was done in an appropriate way.
And can I say?
Go ahead.
In the bill itself, under Section 4B, prompt delivery of direct commercial sales, the Secretary of State shall ensure prompt approval, delivery of all direct commercial sales of defense articles for Israel expected in years 2024, 2025, which would include the sale you're talking about.
So my concern there is that if Israel had had weapons to defend themselves, that when their border was crossed and invaded, that maybe they could have at least mitigated some of the casualties that were incurred from Hamas. But just anecdotally, people that I know who have come to the United States from Israel, have lived in Israel, tell me that they've slowly been deprived of their right to defend themselves in situations like this. And I think that's short-sighted. And I think as a large country as we are, we sort of think that the answer is bombs and that Raytheon and Lockheed Martin can solve this, when in fact it may be Remington that could solve this by just giving the people the power to defend themselves. So that's why I went down that path. I just want to close by saying I did not vote for the supplemental. I will vote for this rule. I think everybody deserves a chance to vote on this bill on the floor of the House. But I don't plan to vote for the bill because I think if it did pass the Senate, it'd lead to more civilian casualties, and I think there have been too many civilian casualties already. And with that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania for questions.
Thank you, and I appreciate our witnesses being here to help us try to come to grips with some of the allegations that are being made here. I do have to agree with Mr. Meeks that this appears to be yet another exercise in political haymaking and trying to really politicize something that's much more nuanced and and really addresses some of the core foreign policy powers that the president has. And I'd appreciate it if you can help us try to understand it. I mean, as we've gotten into the situation, you know, obviously, starting with the conflict with the attack by the terrorist group Hamas upon Israeli civilians and everything that has escalated from there, I think the president's been pretty clear all along that he's totally in support of Israel's right to defend itself, but then over the intervening months has been trying to use a variety of tools of diplomacy, you know, starting with persuasion, conversations, you know, suggestions that things aren't going there, but we're still dealing with a sovereign nation when we talk about Israel, and while they may be an ally, we do not control them, so then we end up having to use tools such as Reagan used. Just looking back at the reporting on that from 1981, he indefinitely delayed shipment of F-16s, actually, in an effort to restrain the escalating cycle of violence in the Middle East. And so similarly here, we're seeing that it's a delay, it's not a refusal, right? We've paused shipments of some weaponry, not all weaponry, so there's a lot of parallels there. But the discussion has been about the casualties that could occur if there's an invasion of Rafah where more than 1 million Gazans are sheltering, such as it is, after Israel told them to go there. So, you know, this idea that, you know, suddenly it's a Hamas center, well, then why did Israel tell them to go there? It, you know, raises more questions about execution of this war. So can you just speak a little bit, Mr. Meeks, to you know, the understanding of the power of the president in this type of foreign affairs situation? I mean, my understanding is the president's the commander-in-chief and has a legal right to pause a military shipment. And just clarifying that
Yeah,
not
Article
all
2
aid-
gives him that authority, and he's utilized that authority. And I think he utilized it appropriately, that he is concerned, you know, that these 2,000-pound bombs, he witnessed, as the world has, the damage that they did right after October the 7th. Now, every single person that comes from the United States that I've talked to, all despise Hamas. All want Hamas not to be in leadership and want the leadership gone. The President of the United States wants that very much. The question is, how do you do it? How do you execute it? And when we are delivering those weapons to another government, we can say, if we see that the end result in a particular type of weapon is killing innocents at high levels, don't use that weapon. We're not saying don't use any weapons to go after Hamas. We say don't use that one weapon. There are other mechanisms of which you could utilize to get Hamas. And those have not been stopped. As well as what the President of the United States is saying, and I think communicating for a while now, that he wants to see a plan on how we're protecting those innocents. Now, as you very correctly stated, the 1.2 million people in Rafah were not always there. There could have been a choice, because now I'm hearing this is where the heavy artillery is, and this is where, you know, all of these big Hamas camps are underneath there. Could have been decided to go there first and gone after them. But you moved all these people there, and the president simply says, if you're going to go in there, don't use the 2,000-pound bombs, and show us a plan of which the innocents can move to. That's simple. And if you do it in that regards, as what took place after October the 7th, every democratic country was in support of Israel. Israel did not have to stand alone. Everyone was with Israel. Everyone is still with Israel against Hamas. I've not talked to any diplomat, any head of state from a democratic country, even in the region, Gulf countries. All of them, each and every one of them, wants Hamas gone. They simply say one thing: don't kill masses of people. To do it, we can do it differently. You can do it differently. Let's get a plan together. We're going to protect you, Israel. We're going to help you. And guess what? In the middle of all of this, what did they do still? When Israel was attacked by Iran, they all stepped up. And that sent a message to Iran and others. Now, I believe because of this unity and starting to work together with Israel, Hamas attacked and utilized its terrorist ways, hoping that they get the response that they're getting now. Strategy. Because Hamas is so terrible, they don't care how many Palestinians die. Their goal is to destroy Israel. That's the thing that they have in common with Iran. Because generally you don't have Sunnis and Shias agreeing. But in this case, you do, because they want to destroy Israel. And when Hamas saw that other countries were coming together to normalize relationship with Israel, they said, this got to stop. They committed this terrorist attack, and they got to go for it. And as a result of this, the world now is saying, look, I don't know, what anybody else is seeing, but the world is seeing is, and it's not my, you see the results of the 2,000 bombs that were dropped. You saw the children and the women and those, the innocent died. Now, those wasn't my lying eyes that were seeing those pictures, all the world is. And so we simply, and the president is simply saying that bomb, not let Hamas go, not, we're running away from Israel, not that, we're not going to stand ironclad with Israel. No one is saying that. We're saying we can get Hamas, but we don't have to kill thousands of innocents while we're doing it. And let's figure that out and get that done. That's simple. It's that simple. That's all the president's saying.
I don't know if I agree that it's that simple, but.
I'm saying that's all the president, simple is what the president is saying.
Sure.
Not that the act itself is simple,
Right.
but I'm just trying to explain what the president is saying, why he wants to stop the 2,000-pound bomb.
Sure.
It's not simple, just simple to get Hamas. That's going to take some time. It's going to take precision. It's going to take planning. It's going to take, but it's worth it if you can save lives and still get Hamas.
Well, and I think it speaks to the fact that the whole situation is incredibly nuanced, and everything has other implications. I was struck when looking at the article about Reagan pausing weaponry, that it was about not wanting everyone, including our allies around the world, to believe that there was tacit U.S. approval of increased bombing, which would then encourage further violence. So it's a very complicated thing of trying to get all the players in the right places to move, not just to preserve Rafah or the lives of people in Rafah, but also, according to Jake Sullivan, they're concerned, A, that there isn't a plan for how to move people out of there or to protect more civilians in Rafah, but also what comes after. And that's what's been so striking here is the lack of a plan for after. And I really appreciate the administration's emphasis on we need Israel, we need everybody to step up and say we need to move to what comes after.
And last week, just as the ranking member, I've called numerous ambassadors from other countries Last week, we met along with the Speaker, King Abdullah from Jordan. King Abdullah's message to us was, if we continue with 2,000-pound bombs or continue the way we are, that even he's in jeopardy. The region is in jeopardy. It will get worse than it is right now. When I talk to each of the ambassadors from all of these countries who wants Hamas dead, they're concerned about what happens if we continue with these 2,000-pound bombs and the area further explodes. What happens then? That's not good for Israel. And for me, the first time, for ages, the only two countries that agreed to have a normal relationships with Israel had been in the 70s, Egypt, and in the 90s, Jordan. But now, we had several others that were stepping up. First time. And they were focused on trying to get a two-state solution, which they believe will not get us back just to October the 6th, but to where there's real peace. And when I visit Israel, all the citizens, all I want to do is live in peace. Why do I have to worry about rockets coming over from Hamas? I've been in situations where you sit in a restaurant, never with your back to the door. And when I talk to these, they don't want that either. They said, why does our neighbors hate us? And now, for the first time, we're getting into a situation where all the neighbors don't hate them. Hamas does. Iran does. But let's not create a situation where I was talking to some humanitarians today, and what their concern was that we are creating more Hamas. And it could be for generations that we will then continue this if, in fact, we do not focus on an end result. Then all of these deaths will have been in vain. Let's not let that happen. It's not good for Israel. It's not good for the area. It's not good for the United States of America.
I think for all those reasons, that's why this bill is ill-considered and basically takes a sledgehammer to something that needs to be handled in a much different way. So I would oppose it, and I'll yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you all for being here. You know, we've been debating this for the last 2 hours. You know, I've heard the words humanitarian, loss of innocent lives, civilian casualties on Israel, our friend, which is 11 hours flight time, 7,000 miles from here. Mr. Meeks, does that same words, humanitarian, concern about loss of lives, did it apply with the Biden administration and to the Americans left behind in Afghanistan?
Absolutely.
Is that why they didn't get them out?
No, what happened in that was the agreement to pull them out was initiated by Donald J. Trump.
No, but the president, wouldn't you agree? The president had action. He could, under Biden's leadership, he could have gotten them out.
And he did. Over 120,000 people got out of Afghanistan before the bombing at Abbey Gate.
Were there no Americans left behind?
There were not, from what I understand, many Americans that were left behind were there because they were multinational. They had families, and the Americans at that particular time did not want to get out.
Okay, that's not what Corey Mills says, who's a member of Congress, who's rescued good many Americans.
That's what some folks say from the State Department.
Let me ask you this, we're talking about 2,000-pound bombs that kills thousands of people, well, has the potential to. Is the 2,000-pound bomb called fentanyl in this country that's killed hundreds of thousands of young people and Americans? What's the difference there?
I think there's laws, and we're fighting like hell to stop fentanyl, as we have been trying to fight against drugs, period, in the United States.
So the border's not open?
In my lifetime, the fight initially was against heroin that was coming in through the
No,
border.
but is the fentanyl that's coming in now from open borders that this country's taken from over 100?
Most fentanyl, I visited not too long ago. I went to the borders of Arizona, at where it's one of the largest border crossings there is. And fentanyl coming through. I asked a number of the law enforcement officers at the gate, what's the best way to stop it? They said the technology's old, that there's ways to completely stop it if we was investing at the border. In fact, while I was there, they stopped the car to let me witness what was taking place. And in that car was fentanyl, in the engine block, in the wheels, all through this car. It was detected by an antiquated machine that they had. And what the Border Patrol told me was that the opposite side knows how antiquated it is. They expect one to get stopped, but they'll put 20 through because they know that the equipment that we have, that we're not investing in the new equipment that would catch all of it. And so they told me that if we would just move forward, as it was put into the bill that we had bipartisan, but it was coming out of the Senate, that would have invested in the border of the new technology so that going through ports of entry, like in Nogales, it would catch a lot more. But we didn't pass that bill.
You would agree this administration has pretty much opened the borders up. The bill you're talking about from the Senate had 5,000 a day, which that could be coming here with no documentation whatsoever. I mean,
I'm just telling
is
you
it,
what the Border Patrol told me in
Well,
Arizona.
Mr. McCall, isn't some of, I heard you mention Reagan, the difference in today with what happened in Afghanistan is what's happening with our friends all across the globe. The trust factor is not there with this administration. You even mentioned, you as head of this committee cannot even get a meeting. Mike Pompeo was giving meetings weekly. But that's a big part of the problems we're facing today, wouldn't you say?
Well, I'd say that the foreign policy, at least my critique of it, and you're right to point to Afghanistan, that was the beginning with the embarrassing surrender to the Taliban. Then weakness always invites aggression, conflict, and war. Reagan was right, when you project strength, you get peace. So what happens after Afghanistan? Putin and the Russian Federation moved to Ukraine. Chairman Xi, the unholy alliance at the Beijing Olympics, now threatening Taiwan and the Pacific. Now the Ayatollah, in this case, has reared his ugly head and essentially unleashed one of its proxies, Hamas, to go in to kill innocent civilians in Israel. Why aren't we talking about the innocent civilians that were killed and murdered in Israel? Israel did not start this war. Hamas did. But you know what? Israel's going to finish it with or without us. I'd prefer it to be with us. For if we pull out of our strongest, away from our strongest ally in the Middle East, what message will that send to Iran or to Putin or Chairman Xi? By instituting this de facto arms embargo, what message is that sending to the rest of the world? It only emboldens and empowers our enemies, our adversaries, and our allies are questioning us. Is Saudi going to buy, will they buy weapons from us as part of this peace deal, or are they going to question whether we're going to pull the rug out and buy them, and they'll just buy it from China? So I believe Israel is just saying, look, we got to finish this. We got 4 battalions in Rafah. We're going to evacuate. We're not going to throw 2,000-pound bombs. They're going to use those for the tunnels. And I think as evidenced by Gaza City, you didn't see the ratios are much lower than what West Point Academy reports in Modern Warfare, a 9-to-1 ratio. I think that speaks volumes. But we're not talking about the innocent civilians killed on October 7th. All we were talking about now is the Hamas-controlled human shields of the Palestinians, who I feel for. And we need a humanitarian plan, and Israel has submitted that plan to the administration. And they're putting tents up right now in that humanitarian zone. And we need to open up the flow of humanitarian aid. But I think this is a moment of weakness in the United States, and this is what you get when you project weakness.
Well, I appreciate you putting this up. I intend to support it. As every the Pompeos of the world will tell you now, the question I heard, is it good for America? The terrorists that did the damage to Israel are behind the gates, in his words, as of last week. They're in the gates, in the gates. Same thing's going to happen here. And it's a sad day in this country. We're having to let it happen. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Norman. Yield to the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the chairman and the ranking member for being here today, and appreciate the fulsome nature of the conversation. And the debate, don't want to belabor the point, I guess 2 fairly straightforward questions for you, Mr. Chairman. First is, I just want to make sure I understand this right. You testified to, it sounds like, the inability of your committee or of you personally to be able to connect with administration officials. So are you attesting today that you don't speak with Secretary Blinken or National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan or any of these folks on a periodic basis? I mean, I'm trying to understand. You're the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I assume you have fairly regular interactions with them, or am I mistaken?
Well, we will have the Secretary testify, I believe, next week, and it will be an interesting time. But no, we have not received any briefings on this issue. We have requested those. We've received absolutely zero.
I just want to clarify.
And so everything, I mean, Mr. Meeks is talking about the 2,000-pound bombs. When the president says, if they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying any weapons, I don't know what he means other than what he says. And without the benefit of a brief, I don't know what weapons are being withheld. We assume the 2,000-pound bombs, but it could be a whole lot of other stuff.
And Mr. Chairman,
and all I know is what I see publicly in the news.
And I'm not asking about the substance here.
Yeah.
And these aren't trick questions.
Well,
I'm trying to figure out, I guess what I'm saying is, you don't talk with Secretary Blinken on the phone?
I do, but they are not talking on this one.
So he won't answer your calls, or what?
They are not talking to this committee on this issue, period.
So he won't answer your call? I guess I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to get again, this isn't it's not meant to be.
I have a call scheduled on Friday.
Last Friday?
This Friday.
You have a call scheduled this Friday with the Secretary about this subject?
Well, and about he'll be testifying next week.
Sure.
However, we've asked for repeated briefings from the administration on, hey, we're hearing these rumors and Axios News is reporting this, and CNN. What is going on?
Okay.
And we want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but without any information coming forward from the administration, all I have is the press and the president's words on CNN. That's the best I got.
Let me try this a different way. Ranking Member Meeks, I assume you're having conversations with folks at the White House, or officials, Secretary Blinken, relevant undersecretaries. Am I mistaken, or is that?
No, that's correct.
Okay. Part of why I'm asking this question, it just seems to me like it would be fairly straightforward to ultimately be able to engage the administration on the questions that you have.
I agree.
And sounds like you've got a call scheduled with Secretary Blinken on Friday. So perhaps the next relevant question, or the next logical question for me anyways, is why not have this go through regular order? Why not follow the normal process, have a legislative hearing, have the administration come in and testify about their position, have them be cross-examined by the very capable members on your committee, both Republicans and Democrats. Mark up the bill. I think you have a markup scheduled for this Wednesday or Thursday. I'm not on foreign affairs. On what day?
Thursday.
I think it's Thursday.
Yeah.
You mark up the bill and then bring it to this committee. I mean, the Rules Committee. That's what I suppose is the part that's most perplexing to me.
Well, I think what's perplexing is that the administration will not respond to our request. We asked that Mr. McGurk on the National Security Council come to brief us, you know, and we've gotten, you know, it's great that the ranking member has this access that the chairman doesn't, but maybe that shows you the partisan nature of this administration, that they won't talk to
But it sounds like you have a call scheduled with the Secretary of State in 3
about his
days.
testimony next week.
Sure.
But we've asked for repeated information on this, and we've been stiff-armed
And so
by this
if that's,
administration.
and if that's the case, Mr. Chairman,
It is.
and I hear you, then hold a legislative hearing.
Well, you
And
know,
if the
it's hard to
witnesses,
go regular order when
me-
you can't
let
have
me-
a witness for a hearing.
let me complete my statement, and then I'll give you a chance to respond, Mr. Chairman. My point is, proceed with the legislative hearing. If the witnesses don't show, the witnesses don't show, mark up the bill, give your members an opportunity to amend the bill, to have a fulsome debate about a number of different constitutional questions that I think this bill poses, as was noted in some of the prior exchanges, and then bring it to this committee. But it's not clear to me why this didn't follow that
I think
process.
because Israel's in a hot war, this is an emergency, and we can't wait till after the break. And so
Okay.
there's a lot of, and because they've gone against congressional intent.
So why not do a
And so-
legislative hearing last Friday? I mean, my understanding is the president made his announcement last
okay.
Wednesday.
With all due respect, who would testify?
What was that?
Who would testify?
My point is that you would open up the legislative hearing, you'd ask the administration to testify. If they choose not to testify, that would be an answer in and of itself, and you would then have an opportunity to hold a markup. And perhaps that would shape the view of various members in this body as to this
I
particular
will
piece of
say, the ranking
legislation. But
member and
my-
I
lem-
worked pretty well with the secretary, but I'll say on this one, it's been complete silence.
and I'm
And I
not,
don't know why.
I'm not discounting your,
That's the fact.
obviously, I'm not having conversations
Yeah.
with the Secretary of State. I'm simply saying the president's announcement, as I understand it, happened last Tuesday, last Wednesday. The House and House Republicans canceled votes last Thursday, sent everyone back home to their respective districts and their respective states. We didn't have votes yesterday. We weren't called back. We're here today. I don't know why, if it was such an urgent matter as you're describing it, steps couldn't have been taken again to
Well,
give,
you know,
let
you
me
have
just
7
finish, and I'll
days
give you a
notice
chance,
for Mark,
to give
there's
some
a-
semblance of process. Well, I mean, I'm glad that you're adhering to the 7-day notice for markup, but not following regular order at all with respect to consideration of this bill.
I don't see how you can follow regular order with an administration that won't talk to you.
I think, Chairman, I would simply say, because I have great respect for you, as you know, and respect your views on a number of, wide range of matters, but in particular matters of foreign policy. And I would just suggest to you, given the nature of what we're discussing here today, following regular order with respect to this particular bill would not have been an immense task. It's something that, let me just conclude, and I'll give you and the ranking member a chance to respond.
Yeah.
It's something that I think you and the ranking member, given the trust you have for one another and the partnership you've developed, could have easily gotten done, in my view, perhaps on the same timeline. And so I would just encourage you, because I suspect this isn't going to be the last time that the Rules Committee is called to consider an emergency measure that perhaps comes from your committee. We're called to do that on a number of committees with some regularity these days. But I would hope for the next time when it comes to your committee,
Right.
that you would take a moment and perhaps find some ways to, you have a very diligent team, I suspect, on the committee, find some ways to make the necessary arrangements to go through regular order. I want to give the ranking member a chance to
But can I
respond.
say I
to that.
appreciate that?
Go ahead.
And that, this is considered an emergency war time. Having said that, we will be marking up another bill pertaining to this issue with regular order that involves notification. I think the biggest problem here is when we're notified to approve weapon sales, and we do so, and then Congress appropriates monies with that intent, and then the administration, say, wants to change course, that Congress at least deserves to be notified by the administration as to why they're doing this policy. And we did not receive that from this administration. That's part of the problem here. I think this other bill will help address that, along with the joint resolution of disapproval.
And I understand your frustrations, and I would just simply say again, irrespective of where folks land in terms of their views of the president's decision in this particular case, insofar as you believe that he made the wrong decision, and you are attempting to change it, to change the policy, you've made repeated references to the urgency of the situation. The president, the White House, has issued a veto threat against this bill. It will be vetoed if it passes the House and the Senate, and of course, it's not going to be considered in the Senate. So this isn't about changing the policy. This is about let me conclude. I'll give you an opportunity. But this is about, obviously, you and others of a like view articulating a message and conveying a message to the White House. I understand your reasoning for doing so, but I'm simply suggesting that insofar as you'd like to actually change the policy, and you believe that it is urgent, then working with the administration and working with the ranking member, I would think would be preferable. I need to give the ranking member...
The ranking member will tell you that we do normally work that way. In this case...
I wish it would have been this case.
We were not given the... I do want to say this. We were not given the benefit of that from this administration. Having said that, yeah, a part of this exercise is to put pressure on the administration to do the right thing. It's interesting how today we just got notification of a $1 billion weapons package. Don't you find that interesting?
I think you should
And don't you find that this exercise is actually working?
I find it more interesting that Secretary Blinken is about 20 miles from here and that the two of you can't get on the phone so that you can you can develop a plan.
I have a good relationship. We won't talk about this one.
Ranking Member Meeks.
Couple of things. Number one, and I'll say this publicly, so if, in fact, the administration is refusing to come to testify to request, let's do a joint letter. I'll sign off on it also, because I don't know of those scenarios where the witness come in to testify at a hearing. You know, I'd say on those issues we agree upon, let's do it, because I think it would be informative for Democrats and Republicans. And I would be all for it, you know, in the spirit of the bipartisanship of what we have in the committee, which I believe is one of the most bipartisan committees there is. And so I would be all for trying to make sure, this is a very important issue, that we make sure that happens in that regards. I think that's tremendously important. I think that we are dealing with the messaging bill. I mean, that's what this really is. You know it's not going anyplace. So the whole purpose is, as has been done almost in, not only in our committee, but almost every committee here, there's been messaging bills trying to attack Joe Biden. I mean, I keep hearing about, as one of the questions were asked, about the plot of Afghanistan. I didn't hear a single Republican say anything about Donald Trump when he had the Taliban at Camp David. Not one, with Pompeo.
He didn't have them, but I know he was thinking about it.
And, well, I've seen the Secretary of State, then Pompeo, with them. I mean, laughing. The agreement to pull out was not started by the Biden administration. So if there was weakness, the weakness should have been talked about during the Trump administration, when he was the one that initiated, we're pulling out, and set a deadline of when we pulled out, which was inherited by Joe Biden. But yet, when we want to talk about Afghanistan and try to talk about all of it, we can't get hearings on that. It's just on those last days of the pullout, which is just an attack or attempted attack on Joe Biden. There was a lot of other things that was purported that took place in Afghanistan that is also proven not to be true. That we allowed the bomber to get away, that somebody had him in the sights. After investigation that the administration agreed upon, that was proven not to be true. And we did, in my estimation, to some of the innocent families whose loved ones was killed, thinking that something else happened. So don't come now and say Joe Biden is weak when you're talking about diplomacy, because for me, that's strength. It's easy to say, in my opinion, let's go bomb them. I mean, that's how I grew up. That was easy. That's what bullies did. Let's just go fight them. Diplomacy is much harder, very difficult. And as Representative Scallon indicated, it's not simple. It's hard. It's frustrating, but it's worth it. And I want to finish, because I keep saying this is the way I think, I don't know whether it was Mr. Norman said this or not, let's just finish it. I want to finish it so that the Israelis can live in peace. I don't want to finish it where war continues on and Israeli can't, they still have to worry about rockets being fired over. They still got to worry about people saying that Israel should not exist, and thereby folks focused on destroying Israel. I want to end it for real, where Israel has finally a Jewish state that is safe from Hamas and terrorists, and others in the region acknowledge their right to exist and want to normalize relationship with them. This is why I'm calling and talking to individuals, ambassadors now, finding out when their heads of states or their foreign ministers will be traveling, because they also want to change the scenario. This is a moment that is tremendously important, and to not consider them. Look, I heard, will Saudi Arabia trust us? If, in fact, you know, by the president saying, don't utilize 2,000-pound bombs, they're going right. They will trust us. They don't want us to use it. They think it will damage the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia if this war continues to go in the way that they do. And the only way we're going to solve it is having, that's why all of us, I mean, most of us, I was a big, and still am a big supporter of the Abraham Accords, because it goes toward that solution. I don't want to do anything that jeopardizes it. And any Israeli I talked to, they were big supporters of the Abraham Accords because it finally meant some way of having peace for themselves. They're afraid that this will jeopardize it. Just talk to the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians. How we do this and how we end this matters. Let's get rid of it. And there's one thing that we all agree upon. One thing we all agree upon. Hamas has got to go. So no one is saying, forget Hamas, let Hamas stay. You know, we all agree. That terrorist organization who does not believe in Israel's right to exist, who will do this again if they are allowed to do it, has got to go.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, thanks, gentlemen. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Chairman McCall, have you requested any classified briefings on this topic?
Yes. We requested briefings from the administration. We made phone calls. We've had no response. The only response we got was on the day the president formally announced this decision. At about the same time it was being reported in the media. Very limited information given to my staff director.
Is this common or uncommon with this?
Very
administration?
uncommon, yeah.
What do you attribute
No, the
this?
only other time it happened was when, you know, the special envoy to Iran, Mr. Mali, we requested him several times because he was the special envoy who was negotiating the Iran deal. Then he wouldn't show up, and guess why? Because he was under investigation by the FBI for violations of his security clearance. That's the only other time.
Do you have any speculation as to what's going on here? What do you attribute this to?
I can't, I mean, you're asking me to speculate. All I know is that it's been silence. We've been trying to get information on what weapons have been withheld and why are you doing this? In the meantime, we talked to the Israelis. They're very upset about this. They thought this relationship, this does great damage to the relationship, and it should have been handled not in a public matter, but rather privately. I agree with that assessment, and I also, I can only imagine they didn't want us to know what was going on because they knew what the consequences would be when we've already approved these weapons in the four corners, and the Congress has appropriated the monies with the specific intent to deliver the defense articles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, my favorite quote about Joe Biden is from President Obama's former secretary, Defense Secretary Robert Gates. I'm going to read it so I don't get it wrong because it's so good. But Secretary Gates said, "I think he has been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades." And I mean, remember, this is a president that brags about when he was vice president, advising President Obama not to carry out the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. I mean, and this is now the president. And he comes into office, he approves Nord Stream 2, which allows the Russians to pump in gas to Europe. By the way, at the same time, almost the same time as he killed Keystone XL in our own country. You then have the disastrous withdrawal of Afghanistan, where he gave up the Bagram Air Base first. I mean, that's the first thing he did was give up our air superiority in the one base that we could maintain order. 13 American service members dead. He also, let's not forget, delisted the Houthis as a terrorist organization, and then embarrassingly had to relist the Houthis. He paused LNG exports, which of course benefit no one but Russia and Iran. And then you had October 7th. Since October 7th, there's been 100 attacks on U.S. service members just in the Middle East. And let's not forget this. You still have 5 Americans that are still held hostage in Gaza. Mr. Chairman, do you think if this president wasn't so bad on foreign policy and maybe adopted some of the foreign policy of the former administration, we wouldn't be having these problems, these disasters on the international stage?
Well, we didn't seem to have them in the previous administration. My theory is there's a bit of a fear factor, perhaps, or unpredictability. Having said that, your analysis is absolutely spot on, that the world's on fire now. And you have to ask yourself the question, why? Why is all this happening right now? You go back to Keystone, unleashing Putin's energy into Europe, making them dependent on Russia. Not American LNG terminals in Europe, but Russia. Then Afghanistan, Ukraine, Taiwan, the Pacific, now the Ayatollah. I mean, every day I worry about World War III and the consequences of this unholy alliance, Russia, China, and Iran, and North Korea. And if a strategic error is made at this point where we could be, in the future. I think this particular decision, why do it in the darkness of night? Why not be transparent with Congress as to what you were doing? Why not give notification? Why not brief the members of the committee that has primary jurisdiction over you? But that didn't happen. And I admire the ranking member greatly. But, if you can't finish Rafah, you can't finish Hamas. That's a bottom line. So when the president says, if you go into Rafah, I will not supply any weapons to you, I got to take him at face value. And what that means is that Israel cannot complete its mission. And if they can't complete the mission, that means Hamas is still going to be out there with 4 battalions, and you're never going to get to where we want to be on the diplomatic side with the Saudis, with UAE, with the Arab world and nations, for the first time recognizing the existence of the right of Israel to exist, the state of Israel. And that's where we want to be, but we can't get there until we let Israel do its job. I agree, it's got to be done in a humanitarian way, with a humanitarian zone. They're working on that right now. They're giving notices of evacuation. But to tie one hand behind their back and say, we're going to stop weapons shipments that Congress approved, I don't think that's the right strategy. And I think it sends the wrong message to not only our allies, but our adversaries, that we are weak.
Well, I think you can see that the wrong message is being sent, and case in point is Ukraine. If you look at Russia, remember, Russia took Crimea during President Obama's administration. Then you had 4 years of President Trump where the Russians did not make any more moves on Ukraine. Then enter Biden, and then the Russians move in to Ukraine, of course. It's very clear that our allies don't respect this president. They don't fear this president. And these dictatorships and these terrorist organizations feel like they have free reign because they have zero accountability, because they know the Biden administration will do very little to prevent their nefarious actions. So thanks for fighting this fight, Chairman McCall, and I yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member Meeks, for coming back to our committee. Last time we were at our committee, you were in complete agreement. We did discuss the fact that China, Russia, and Iran were an unholy alliance and were enemies of the American interests. You pointed out, thank you, Mr. Chairman, I referred to it often, about the fact that for decades, every Republican president had been opposed to Russian or USSR imperialism and expansion, every United States president except for Donald Trump. That Donald Trump was the first United States president who actually courted Putin, who tried to do business in Russia, failed, but tried to do business in Russia, and that is all documented. We also noted that until former President Trump, almost all Republicans were consistent in rebuking Russia until President Trump. And that is very sad. And what we have now is we have an instance where we have a president who is looking to see what we can do. And thank you very much, Ranking Member, for laying out the reasons why this is important in terms of humanitarian reasons, in terms of working with our allies, making sure we do have allies, because that's the other thing that happened under President Trump, is he destroyed the relationship with our allies. I don't have a whole lot more questions. I've read the bill. It sounds like, there are things that we won't be able to have people actually do their work. If this passed with Section 2, that you won't be able to pay the salaries or expenses of staff to actually analyze whether anything like this should or should not go through in the future. But I'm the last Democrat on this committee. We're outnumbered 94, as it should be, I guess, in the majority. So I'm going to give the time to you, Ranking Member.
Let me just, because this whole idea of, and I don't know, people have forgotten, because you touched on it, it was Donald J. Trump that said he trusted Russia's intelligence over the United States when he was in Russia. It was Donald J. Trump who befriended Kim Jong-un, called him one of his best friends. It's one that, one of those, that's how I love, wrote him love letters. That wasn't Joe Biden, that was Donald J. Trump. It was Donald J. Trump that said NATO had outlived its use and didn't need to exist anymore. That wasn't Joe Biden. Under Joe Biden, what I do see, NATO now is stronger than ever. Fact of the matter is, who would have thought that Finland and Sweden would become part of NATO, strengthening it? Under Joe Biden, that happened. It's Donald J. Trump that said something about the European and NATO, and European countries, that if they didn't do something, and Vladimir Putin wanted to do something to it, so be it. You're talking about strengthening and working with our allies, and not just talking about America alone and forgetting about everybody else, because Donald J. Trump says it's America by themselves. But under Joe Biden, two other countries in the Indo-Pacific, when we talk about dealing with China, who had never worked together before, South Korea and Japan, who brought them together, and they're working in alliance with our other allies in the region, in the Indo-Pacific, like never happened before. You talk about the Quad and other coalitions working together with our allies to combat Russia, China, Iran. Who's leading that? Bringing the world together? It's Joe Biden. And what we're trying to do now is to keep those things aligned and moving together in that regard. Now, I, for one, did not hear any Republicans saying anything about those actions that Donald Trump was taking when he did them. You know, Afghanistan, who said that we had to get out by a certain date? Who gave the Biden administration nothing? There was no structure, no plans or anything when he took over. Constantly complained, people in the State Department and others, about the lack of preparation, the lack of anything. And fact of the matter is, it was Donald Trump that released all the prisoners that was in Afghanistan.
I don't remember
That
that
requested,
historical footnote. But,
well, requested, no, in Afghanistan, at the negotiations with the Taliban, there was an agreement to allow individuals. Well, what he did specifically was tell the Taliban specifically he did not have to deal with the government. They did not have to deal with the government of Afghanistan. They would not have to deal with he undermined the government of Afghanistan, which is what took place. So that is where I see fault, and many of my Republican colleagues want this guy to come back to be the president of the United States. When I talk to most of our allies, they're actually worried to death just about that. The last thing they want to see is him to be president of the United States of America, because they know the danger that that presents to our and to their national security. So and again, on this bill, I can't stress enough, because I think, Mr. Neguse, you were absolutely correct. We could do this markup on this particular bill on Thursday or Wednesday, whenever we're doing a markup. Ready to do it. Let's do that. We could do this in regular order. Regular order can be had. We can push things. If it's an emergency, we can make it more timely. If there's an issue in regards to getting witnesses, because I think that Mr. McCall and I can agree, it is important for the administration to have witnesses come testify before our committee. And if they refuse, then we should be together. I will guarantee you, if they refuse, we would be together and demanding that the administration appears before our committee. I have members on both sides, on my side of the aisle and his side, of both would benefit from such if we had these hearings called. So I thank the gentlelady for the time, but I don't want to have revisionist history. When you look at the work of Joe Biden, bringing people together, trying to work with diplomacy, not what Donald J. Trump did as 4 years as president, because that's why the people got rid of him in 2020 in the next election, because they did not like the leadership that he brought to the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, Chair. Thanks, gentlelady. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
I thank the chairman. I'll just ask Chairman McCall if in your recollection, when President Trump was president, were were we involved in more war or less war? I would ask whether or not the horrific attack on Israel by Hamas occurred under President Trump's watch or under President Biden's watch.
I would say there were no wars in the prior administration. And I would also say, with respect to Ukraine, it was President Trump that delivered a $300 million lethal aid package for Ukraine that I signed off on. The first president to ever do so. Whereas the prior administration was giving them blankets, but not weapons. We had deterrence, I think,
Would the chairman agree that
at that time.
that Ukraine was invaded by Russia under President Biden's watch, not President Trump's watch? That the Abraham Accords were carried out under President Trump's watch, not President Biden's watch? As I just noted, Hamas went into Israel conducting indescribable, horrific events on the people of Israel under President Biden's watch, not President Trump's watch. Is it not true that Nord Stream 2 set the stage for Russia going into Ukraine under President Biden's watch, not President Trump's watch? Is it not true that we abandoned Afghanistan, leaving Bagram, leaving Americans behind under President Biden's watch, not President Trump's watch? Are these not all true statements?
Those are all absolutely correct, and it's not by coincidence. It's by design, because when our adversaries see weakness, you invite aggression, and that's, sir, is what we have right now.
Before I go on, I think that I would like to yield a minute or as such time as he needs to the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I'd like to thank my friend from Texas. Yeah, just a few points in rebuttal. So as my friend from Texas was saying, if you look at the timeline, it tells you everything you need to know. The world is now on fire. It was under control in the last administration, but if you look at it, Nord Stream 2 is the best example. Somebody said that President Trump was aiding Russia. President Trump was shutting down Nord Stream 2. It was the Biden administration that greenlit Nord Stream 2. And again, I hate to reiterate this, but they did it at the same point where they shut down the Keystone XL pipeline for us. So when we can't export our own LNG, Russian gas is more expensive, by the way, which is much dirtier, the dirtiest gas there is. And at the same time, the Biden administration, to this day, is still fighting us on LNG exports. They're not allowing any permits for LNG exports, which again, weakens our power on the international stage and strengthens who? Russia and Iran. There was some talk about allies across the world not trusting this administration. Why don't you go and ask Niger what they think about the Biden administration giving up a $100 million drone base, and who took it? Russia.
Right.
I mean, it's completely laughable to think that this administration is hard on Russia. No, the Russians took it in Niger. It's a $100 million drone base that we just basically gave to the Russians. Let's talk about Ukraine. They were talking about statements and everything. You know, if you look, leading up to the war in Ukraine, it was Trump that was providing lethal aid to Ukraine. Then Biden comes in, and Biden starts to make all these ridiculous statements that we would, quote unquote, tolerate a minor incursion into Ukraine. Like we would be okay if the Russians took a slice of Ukraine. He should have continued to give lethal aid to the Ukrainians to prevent the war from taking place. Instead, Biden was busy, I guess, sending them blankets and well wishes instead of the Javelin missiles they needed. There was a comment about Trump not trusting the intel community. Is this the same intel community that told us that Kabul would stand for years and Kiev would fall within days? I mean, maybe he was right not to trust what the IC said, because they've been right so many times before. There was a comment about a prisoner being released from a theater internment facility in Afghanistan. That prisoner was released. He was released under President Biden right before with the withdrawal. So Biden gave up the Bagram Air Base, released the theater internment facilities, which of course houses terrorists, and then one of those terrorists, of course, blew up Abbey Gate, killing 13 U.S. service members, directly attributable to Joe Biden. The Abraham Accords. Abraham Accords, great thing. But the Abraham Accords came about because the Obama administration was so bad with foreign policy that them pushing this ludicrous idea of having an Iranian nuclear deal, it actually drove the Arab states to the Israelis against the Persians. And it was President Trump who then capitalized on that and was able to work out the Abraham Accords between many of the Arab states and the Israelis. It was heading in a very good direction, which led to the attack of September 7th, because Hamas, Iran, and other nefarious actors saw the Saudis and the Israelis and the other Gulf states getting close, and they needed something to drive a wedge. And of course, they knew they could get away with an attack with, again, a weak Biden administration. And let's talk about the Houthis. Delisting the Houthis from the terrorist watch list is an absolute sin. And somebody said something, our allies respect Joe Biden. How would you like to be one of our allies in Saudi Arabia? And it's okay when the Houthis are attacking them. They're not terrorists when they're attacking the Saudis. But the second they start attacking Americans, then they're terrorists. They were terrorists from the beginning to the end. It just shows where our priorities are and how we won't defend our allies. So what's been said, and there was also some comment about the American people. If you pull up any polling data on this, right, you could do a poll tomorrow. The vast majority of Americans trust President Trump over Joe Biden on foreign affairs. Irrefutable. I'll try to pull it up if another gentleman would yield me more time. But with that, I yield back and I thank my friend from Texas.
Thank my friend from Pennsylvania. I would ask my friend from Texas, Chairman, we've glossed over the impetus behind this, and I recognize that I think everyone in this room would acknowledge the horrific events of October 7th. But, you know, there was, for example, a Time magazine article, the worst 45-minute film you will ever see, which is referencing the film that I think many in this room have seen or at least seen parts of. In the way they describe it, the appalling record of Hamas brutality has set a new standard in graphic evidence of unrivaled human atrocities. In the aftermath of October 7th, brutal massacre of 1,400 innocent Israeli civilians, including mass rapes, tortures, bonding and immolation of toddlers, beheadings, and live mutilation. The Israeli leadership wrestled with how to show the world these horrors without desecrating the memory and dignity of these victims, while also attentive to the privacy and suffering of the victims' families. Massive, horrifying video and photographic imagery of the grotesque scenes was available through the sickening scenes which greeted Israeli rescuers who found new victims alive. But even more footage was provided by the gleeful terrorists themselves from their own body cameras, dash cams, and the devices of victims as they were slaughtered. That's what happened. That's what happened. And when that sort of thing, when America's been attacked and when that sort of thing has happened, and when FDR sat in this very building, in the chamber in which we serve, and he described the day of infamy, and he went through and describing what had occurred when we were attacked by Japan, and then set out to say that we weren't to declare war, that we were in a state of war. And when he described all that, what he did not do was outline what the proper casualty ratio is. He said that we would win. And if I'm the Prime Minister of Israel, my goal is to win. Nothing more, nothing less. It is to win. It is to defeat the enemy that wants to eradicate my people and my country. Would we call on any leader of any sovereign nation to take a different approach when attacked brutally? And not just in a single event, not just some single moment. I would ask the chairman how aware he is, which I'm sure is quite aware, of the extent to which the population, by any objective poll, by international organizations and media, of the people in Gaza, of what their perspective is on the appropriateness of the attacks by Hamas on Israel. Can the gentleman speak to that?
Well, there's massive celebration in the streets. Mr. Meeks and I visited the Prime Minister right after October 7th. And first thing he did is he showed the video of the Hamas attacks. And he's a very strong man. I've never seen tears in his eyes. Those are his own people. And he said, I want you to show this to Congress so they know what they did to my people, and I want them to remember it. And so we did. And we showed the video. Now I was in Kfar Aza, the kibbutz on the border with Gaza. And to know that entire community was wiped out. And the daycare center, the children were burnt alive. And the grotesque manner with which they carried themselves out. Israel does not target innocent civilians, Hamas does. Israel did not start this conflict, Hamas did. and Israel has the right to finish it. And the thing I find most egregious with this administration is that they're tying the hands of our greatest ally in the Middle East, and they're not allowing them to finish the job by Joe Biden saying, if you go into Rafah, I will cut off all weapons. What does that mean? And what kind of message is that sending to the rest of the world? I will cut off your weapons if you go into Rafah, which is the only way, sir, we can finish, that Israel can finish this conflict. You compare it to 9/11, they experienced what is 20 times the 9/11 on October 7th. And they're going to do this with or without us. But I say we stand with our ally and not abandon her at this critical point in time. And that's what I'm worried that this administration is doing.
I agree with the chairman, and I would note that there is a significant amount of polling. Here's one poll being conducted by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, which is funded by European Union and the United States-based Ford Foundation, which says that 71% of Palestinians in both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank believe Hamas made the right decision in attacking Israel. This is from March. There's additional polling that would suggest, for example, that 91% of Palestinians, according to the survey, do not think Hamas has committed war crimes. And 93% say the terrorist organization did not commit the well-documented acts of rape and civilian slaughter that took place on October 7th. My point being is it not also true that there is a significant, lack of clarity with respect to Hamas and the members of who might make up, for example, the battalions that the gentleman described, and the civilian population, and where those lines bleed? Is that not an accurate reflection of the difficulty with which Israel is faced with dealing with taking out the enemy combatants?
Absolutely. But the fact that they use their own people as human shields in hospitals, they take the hostages. This is why it's so difficult for Israel to go in. They want to protect innocent civilians, but it's Hamas that puts their own civilians at risk. It's Hamas that's blocking the checkpoints to block humanitarian assistance from coming in. They just killed 3 Israeli soldiers trying to bring humanitarian assistance into Gaza, and Egypt now is blocking the Rafah. Look, this is going down a very dangerous path in my view. If the optics are that we're now in defense of Hamas over Israel, and that's what, unfortunately, the optics are looking that way with this decision by the administration. Now, I understand, I know my friend is well-intended here, but in that part of the world, they understand power and strength. This looks like a weak moment to me, and it sends a really dangerous message to our adversaries.
Has it not been a dominant theory of the way we carry out our engagement in war to go in and just level the enemy, right? Was that not essentially the way we carried out our operations, for example, in Iraq in 2003 or Desert Storm?
Israel is the only country I know that gives leaflets to evacuate.
Right.
Did Hamas give that opportunity to the Israelis? I don't think so. But they are giving 4 weeks to have innocent civilians evacuate. No other nation at war has done something like that. And I would say that, again, the ratio here is far better than our attempts in Mosul. That was 5-2. Here it's 2-1. West Point Academy says in urban warfare, the ratio is typically 9-1.
9-1, right.
That's
and
West Point
the United
Academy.
Nations has that data as well.
And the United Nations, and I would say that Israel is exercising great caution to protect innocent lives.
Would it surprise the chairman to know that there's sources that show that Israel has made over 70,000 direct phone calls, sent over 13 million text messages, left over 15 million pre-recorded voicemails to notify civilians that they should leave combat areas, that they've given, in many cases, weeks of warning for civilians to evacuate the major urban areas of northern Gaza before it launched its ground campaign in the fall, that they dropped over 7 million flyers and deployed technologies wherever they could to try to ensure that people had ample room to get out from the attacks when they're trying to target the areas where Hamas had purposely embedded within the civilian populations while they would carry out their attacks on Israel from those positions?
That is all correct. And they're doing the same thing in Rafah right now to allow the opportunity for evacuation. No other nation on earth has ever gone to this extent to protect innocent civilians.
We've covered this. We've covered the ratios. I think that all of the evidence that I've looked at certainly points to the fact that Israel, frankly, may be studied for a long time in our military academies and in how one carries out warfare, particularly urban warfare in the modern context, on how to conduct such an operation in a way to get the result that you want, to destroy the enemy while trying to minimize civilian deaths. Would the chairman agree?
We've never had a humanitarian zone set up in the middle of a war zone. So Israel, you're correct in this analysis. And, for us to tie one hand behind their backs right now is the worst thing we can do.
Yeah, and I'll close with this by saying, look, I was fairly public in my opposition to our overall omnibus spending package for a variety of reasons that don't really address this specific issue. I opposed the foreign aid package for a variety of reasons involving both our lack of border security, my concerns in advancing with Ukraine without as clear of a mission as I think we should have, but in significant part with respect to the piece involving Israel, because of my concern that the $9 billion would be used in ways that would actually be counter to Israel, and my concerns in talking to people in Israel that it could be used that way. I understand my colleagues that reach a different conclusion on the balance of the interests. But my point of bringing that up is just to say, look, here we are. We have funded our regular, $4 billion-ish of MOU in the regular appropriations package. And we've got now was this 14 billion or 17 billion that was in the supplemental,
16, I think.
16 point something billion in the supplemental for Israel. And the administration, Congress having literally just acted to do this, and the administration is going to say, this administration knows best, when in fact it was this administration this isn't the first time, right? They recently abstained from the United Nations Gaza ceasefire resolution, correct?
Correct.
The Biden administration tried to restart the failed Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, which would further legitimize and empower Iran, while we're currently removing the sanctions that are empowering Iran, which is undermining Israel, correct?
Correct, and the best thing we did in the supplemental is we reapplied those sanctions on energy and drones and rockets. Yeah.
And the Biden administration has let Iran access upwards of approximately $50 billion in revenue through this lack of sanction enforcement, correct?
Correct.
And the president then came into office, he restarted UNRWA, right? He took the affirmative step to restart UNRWA, which President Trump had stopped. We, Congress, had to step in and tell the administration in the appropriations package, stop funding UNRWA, something we'd been calling for. I introduced legislation 3 years ago to defund UNRWA, and we fought for it. We got that put in place. Why? Because finally they woke up on October 7th and said, oh, I guess some of these UNRWA folks are, in fact, saddling up and in bed with the terrorists. Correct?
That's all correct.
I appreciate what we're trying to do here. Obviously, there's some limits in what we can get out of the Senate, getting the president to sign a bill that would undermine his own authority, but the power of the purse is important. I'll close by just saying I wish we had used the power of the purse before we fully gave it up in order to stop the administration from doing this, but we are where we are, so we can try to use this. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes the gentleman from New York for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be very brief. I think there's a lot of people in this country who need a reminder as to who started this war and the manner in which it started. And on October 7th, it was Hamas, not Israel, that launched the horrifying terror attack that took thousands of lives and innocent people hostage. It was Hamas, not Israel, who murdered approximately 1,200 people, including Holocaust survivors, the elderly, babies, and young, beautiful people attending a music festival. It was Hamas to this day who holds over 100 people hostage, including American citizens that continue to sit in tunnels, and we have no answers. The calls for Israel to commit a ceasefire are nothing more than asking our closest friend and ally in the face of an enemy calling for its extermination to stand down and to no longer defend itself. I think many of my colleagues on this side of the aisle would agree with me when I say I am done hearing arguments of false equivalency about the war of self-defense Israel is fighting against a terrorist organization. This is the time to stand with Israel, stand with the Jewish people, not try to cut their legs out from under them, and let them finish Hamas the way that they need to finish this war, and against the hysteria of the morally bankrupt protesters that have occupied college campuses and public spaces in support of a known murderous terrorist entity. So thank you again, Chairman McCall, for being here, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, will try to be brief, but I want to associate my comments with Mr. Langworthy's, especially about the 128 hostage. It bothers me that we got this far into this discussion, and we did not even acknowledge that there are still 128 hostages being held by the terrorist organization Hamas. I want to mention the UN briefly. I found where the UN has said arms exports to Israel must stop immediately. But I cannot find anywhere where the UN has said that exports of weapons and arms to Hamas or the other terrorist organizations that Iran supports should be stopped. I think that it's way past time that we as the United States demand balance from the UN instead of bias. And it's disappointing to me that they would demand that arms exports to Israel be stopped, but not expect Iran to stop exporting to the terrorist organizations out there. I heard a lot about Afghanistan, and I heard a lot about NATO, and I want to read something to the committee, and it's a direct quote from General Kenneth McKenzie's four-star Marine, former commander of U.S. Central Command. This is what he said in testimony before the House Armed Services Committee. I'll give you my honest opinion, and my honest opinion of you shaped my recommendation to the President. This is President Biden. I recommended that we maintain 2,500 troops in Afghanistan, and I also recommended earlier in the fall of 2020 that we maintain 4,500 at that time. I also have a view that the withdrawal of those forces would lead inevitably to the collapse of the Afghan military forces and eventually the Afghan government. The bottom line is Joe Biden ignored the advice of his military commanders, and that's what led to the collapse of Afghanistan. That's open testimony. Mr. McCall, I believe y'all heard similar testimony from both McKenzie and Milley. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, and I was briefed by them at the time in the skiff where they said if this occurs, Afghanistan will fall, and it will fall very rapidly.
And after Afghanistan fell, I was actually in Brussels the day that Russia went into Ukraine. And those of us on the NATO Parliamentary Board were over there in a bipartisan manner trying to discuss things with our NATO partners. And all our NATO partners were doing was fussing at us about what we did to them in Afghanistan. We did not negotiate with our NATO partners about a time to leave. Our president simply told them, we're leaving on this day and you do the best you can. After they fought with us for decades in that country. That, with all due respect, is what diminished the relationship with NATO. Now, I will acknowledge that it has been rebuilt some because of the have to draw back together, but our refusal to even have meaningful discussions with our NATO partners in the withdrawal of Afghanistan is what led to a huge division there and reluctance to trust us and our intel on Ukraine. I guess I'll ask you this, Mr. Meeks. I don't understand why Biden is having this discussion publicly. I don't understand why he came out and said publicly he was going to halt the arms shipments. Can you explain the rationale? I mean, he didn't even say, if Hamas releases the 128 hostages, then I will stop the arms shipment. He just came out and said, I'm going to halt the arms shipment. I could understand a private conversation maybe, but I don't understand the public conversation.
So I think that what the president said, at least what I heard him say, that he was stopping the delivery of a single delivery of 2,000-pound bombs, that there were additional munitions and artillery that would not stop. In fact, I think he further stated, because at that time that he made the statement, Israel had already taken over the Egyptian part of the gate. And he said that was okay because there was not loss of life and it would control the situation a little bit better. So I think, and I want to say that, you know, there's some things that I've heard everyone say, I heard you say that we all agree with. I agree with Mr. McCall that Hamas targets innocent civilians. I agree with him that they hide that they hide and don't care about Palestinians' death.
Well, can I ask you something?
I agree with that, but what I think is, you know, and one of the reasons why I oppose the 2000 bomb is because our values are different than the values of Hamas.
Urban warfare is tough. You know that. I mean, in the position you're sitting in, and it's extremely dense population. There's a lot of innocent people that get killed in war. But why didn't he condition it based on Hamas releasing the 128 hostages?
I agree with you. Every ounce of what he has been doing is to try to get those hostages released. And he says it each and every time. There's not one time that I've not heard him say, I don't care. He says we must get those hostages. That's the reason why he's kept a number of individuals from his administration at the table trying to get those. I want those hostages released. The people of Israel want those hostages released. They must be released. And there's no one that has any sympathy for Hamas.
But that's why he should have said, release the 128 hostages or I'm going to continue to send the weapons.
All he was saying is we don't, as a result of values, we don't want innocent lives. We hate. I mean, when I think about the images that I saw with Mr. McCall when we went of the heinous crimes that Hamas committed on those 1,200 Israeli people. And the fact that they are still under these tunnels, we don't know whether they're dead or alive.
Some of them are dead.
That's right. We don't know. And that gets to me. And I want to destroy them.
I think they announced another one
I don't want to destroy
yesterday.
them. I want to destroy them. But I don't want to kill innocent people either. Because I saw the innocent people that have died as a result of war.
Let me tell you what I think the politics of this is. And I know we may disagree on this, but Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record an article for Politico. Michigan primary leaves Dems begging Biden to set foot in the swing state. The article reads, Democratic leaders nationally and in Michigan are urging Joe Biden to show up in communities upset about his handling of the Israel-Hamas war, a step the president resisted taking in the run-up to the state primary election this week. That election exposed Biden's potential vulnerability on the issue as more than 100,000 people cast uncommitted protest ballots rather than support the president. I think this has more to do with the next presidential election and problems that President Biden has in the far left of the Democratic Party.
And consent request without objection, so ordered.
Okay. And look, it's late. I know there are going to be differences of opinion on that in this room among people I respect, but I feel like that's the reason that he stopped the arms weapons is to accommodate a group on the far left that hates Israel. And I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Minnesota for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just wondering if the chairman had anything that he wanted to add from some of the things that were just discussed, if you.
I think it's all been said. I go back to the way this was all done. No briefing, no information from the administration. The only way I could get briefed on what was happening with weapons being held back was to read the press. And that's not good, especially when you're dealing with your greatest ally in the Middle East and you're talking about withholding weapons. It's not until the president went on CNN saying, if they go into Rafah, I will withhold the weapons, that I heard from the president himself in his own words, did I know that in fact that was accurate. A lot of this has to do with notice to Congress, especially after the four corners, House and Senate, have approved these weapons and appropriations have been made by Congress to fund these weapons, specifically with the intent that they go into Israel. And then in the darkness, with no transparency, they make this decision without any consultation with Congress. I don't think that's the right way to govern, particularly on a matter of this importance. And I think it is going to cause damage. It has caused damage, I know. So I've talked to the Israelis with our relationship, but also it's emboldened Iran and Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader, who can claim victory without ever firing a shot. And I think that's very tragic.
Thank you very much. And I would yield to Mr. Reschenthaler.
Thank you, I appreciate it. There was a comment about the polling numbers that most Americans trust Biden instead of Trump. That just rang weird to me. I mean, I read like one or two polls a day, and I just knew that was patently false. So I have the polling data now. Let's start with this. Here's a CNBC poll from March 2024. Approval rating of Joe Biden on foreign affairs. It's 30%. CNN poll, April 18th through 23rd, 2024. When asked about the past administration's success in foreign affairs, 55% had a favorable view. That might sound low, but when asked about this administration's failures, it was 61%. 61% of Americans viewed Joe Biden's foreign policy as a failure. 61%. Sure.
It's actually my time.
I'm sorry. It's Ms. Fishbach's time. All right. Here's a Gallup poll from March 2024. Who shows good judgment in crisis? Trump is at 45. Biden is only at 40. Here's a Wall Street Journal poll from 2024, March 2024. Who would you trust more on the Israel-Hamas war? Trump 45, Biden 31. The polling numbers speak for themselves. It's patently false and ludicrous that there'd be a comment that most Americans trust Joe Biden over President Trump.
And I was actually planning on yielding to you, but now I guess I won't.
And I just want to end on this because it's so rich. I'd ask unanimous consent for the record to enter an article from The Atlantic by Gail Beckerman. The title of this article is The Middle East Region is Quieter Today Than It Has Ever Been in 2 Decades. The date of that article, 1 October of last year. It shows you that this administration was totally asleep leading up to the October 7th attack. I'd ask you to read the article. Jake Sullivan has some amazing quotes, absolutely horrifying in retrospect, but it shows you just how clueless this administration is. And I yield back to the gentlelady.
And Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, thanks, the gentlelady.
I didn't mischaracterize anybody.
You said it was a blatant falsehood with respect to the polling statement, which is not what the ranking member was saying.
And then he
Well, we can have the record read back about what he said. Oh, so you're looking in the future? When he's elected? Like, he was speculating on what the opinion would be in November?
Wait a minute. We have to go one at a time because the clerk can't keep up with us. Okay, and your time has expired. Your time has expired. The ranking member may answer the question. Well, he was recognized for time, but the ranking member may respond.
Well, the gentleman from Colorado said it right. I was talking about the 2020 election. He did not get reelected. That's basically what I was talking. The American people went to the polls on 2020. Now, I know some people deny or election deniers, but went to the polls and he lost the election in 2020. That is the ultimate poll.
All right, take that to the bank. I think our time with this panel is now concluded. I want to thank you very much for your time. It's a very important matter. Obviously, emotions run high, but I believe we have some amendment testimony that's been waiting patiently. So this panel is excused.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, emotions do run high, but for the record, we want to object to you cutting off a Democratic member of this committee when you extend time very generously to Republican members who speak
Saudi and
forever.
Israel broker this